welcome to this panel session on the new water retail market. I say new, some of you will be aware the market opened on time on the 1st of April, so we are actually now approaching the 6th month point of live trading. So the discussion this morning, we're going to look at how that first 6 months has felt from a customer point of view, what's working well, what's working less well, and where we go from here. So let me do the introductions. First of all, my name is Karma Loveday. I'm the editor of a publication called The Water Report. We follow this market very closely, so I'll be chairing the session today. And our panelists, we've got two representatives from England's largest water retailer, Water Plus. So first of all, closest to me, we have Brian Ebdon.
Hello.
And Brian is the director responsible for small and medium-sized customers for Water Plus. Next to Brian, we have Kim Radcliffe, and Kim is the Chief Operating Officer. Next along, we have Evan Jonette, and Evan is the Policy Manager for the Consumer Council for Water, and that is the statutory customer representative body, and I know that they've been keeping a close watch on how the market's working for customers. And finally, on the end there, we have Mike Robertson, and Mike is the Market Operations Lead for MOSL. And anyone who's unfamiliar, MOSL is the market operator for the new water market. So we're going to have 5-minute comments, opening comments from each speaker, and then we're going to have a bit of a debate. Please, it is for you to take part, so we will have formal questions, but if you wave at me at any point, if you've got a burning desire to ask a question, please do. Okay, so let's start. Would you like to start, Brian?
Sure. So we're Water Plus. We're a joint venture between United Utilities and Severn Trent. We were formed in June 2016, where both business portfolios of United Utilities and Severn Trent joined together to form a separate legal entity, and that entity is called Water Plus. So as we stand, we're about 500,000 sites, just under £1 billion of revenue, and we look after around about 30% of the UK's business water retail. That includes primarily the billing services, so billing the cost of the water, the wastewater, and all the additional services, but also the value-added services around that, so the leak detection, the pipe work, the consumption reduction, and the water management. So we do all that from our base in Stoke. We created a new office in Stoke, which was conveniently halfway between the United Utilities offices and the Severn Trent offices, so no coincidence there. And we've set up a team there for the water market. We're about 400 strong, roughly, in the Stoke office. And the market, as we all know, opened April this year with a big fanfare and opened on time, which I think everyone is very impressed and pleased about. And since then, we've been trading. So happy to say that so far, year to date, we are up in terms of sites, and we are performing very well with one of the lowest churns in the market. So our percentage of customers leaving is, I think, at this point, the lowest in the market. So we're very pleased so far. We're not saying it's perfect. We're not saying the job's done, because I think no one should ever say that. But so far in the market, we are pleased with how we're performing. And I'm sure as we go through, you'll ask us lots of questions. So I'll pause there and hand over to Kim.
Hi everyone, my name's Kim. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Water Plus. I'm actually quite new into the business, so I'm in my 3rd month actually. And I think the key reason that Sue, who's our CEO, has asked me to come and work with the team is predominantly because we need to differentiate ourselves against a backdrop of a product that we can't really differentiate with, and looking at how we can really push the retail market forward. So a big piece for me, I think, is more around how we can really focus on service, what we can do to really differentiate ourselves with service, and how we can add more value to customers. So at Water Plus, that's something that we are very, very focused on. We look at our value-add services as one of our biggest differentiators, and that's the reason why we've been looking more so at things like our water efficiency app, and making sure that we can provide services for customers that are different to other retailers. So I think the purpose for me being in the business is more so to try and get us into a position where we're seen as being number one for customer satisfaction, and really being able to provide a very straightforward and personal service for all of our customers. Again, I think, as Brian said, we've still got some work to do. But being in a business that's only been up and running for such a short amount of time, I'd be very surprised if that wasn't the case. Or you wouldn't need me, really. So I'm very pleased that there's still a lot to do. I think that's about it. Obviously, open for questions in a moment as well. So pass on to Evan.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Evan Jonette from Consumer Council for Water. Those who don't know, sorry, this is going right in my mouth. That's not right. We're the statutory consumer body for the water industry. We do tackle a lot of policy issues. The opening of the retail market was a big one for us. The next one on the horizon, PR19, will be another big one. But we also offer customers direct support and advice. We actually help people who come to us with problems about their water companies and now retailers. So, you know, we do a lot around the whole industry trying to help customers where we can. I'll just start with an update on how customer awareness has shifted. One of the biggest barriers we saw before the market opened was going to be whether customers were aware this market was running. It's historically been a big issue for customers on a lot of things, just awareness of services, being able to access the services. So we knew that doing a push to raise awareness would be a big deal before the market opened. We actually surveyed customers early in 2016 and found that when you asked them the question, do you know this market's going to open? 1 in 10 said, yeah, I think I know something about that. The other 9 out of 10, not so much. Ofwat went back at the end of 2016, said, actually, it's closer to 3 in 10. We're making some inroads. We did a survey again in July. We looked at SMEs, asked them the question, do you think you can switch your water services? And that was closer to 4 in 10 now saying, yeah, I've heard something about this. So certainly awareness is heading in the right direction. We also ask customers, are you interested? Is this something that you might explore? And SMEs, again, were saying, 5 out of 10 of them were saying, yeah, in the next 6 months, I might look into this a little bit more. So there's certainly indications that customers are more aware than they were. They're more interested than they were. But as Brian said, it doesn't mean the job's done. There's still a lot there to do. We're going to revisit that SME awareness in December. We'd like to do that as kind of a tracker over time to see if things are heading in the right direction. It's a little bit of a snapshot on where awareness is. On market activity, obviously that's more maybe MOSL's bag than our bag, but early market signs are basically what our research told us, that proportionate to their numbers, larger customers are obviously more interested in the market. MOSL does report there are smaller customers who are switching, so it's not like it isn't happening. Certainly the contact that we get, 90% of it is from small businesses, so you can kind of tell an organization that supports customers is going to attract those who perhaps are a bit smaller, so 90% are SMEs. Tends to be the segment that needs our help. And only a fraction of those complaints so far have been about switching. So from our own contact, the story kind of says it's a lot of the regular kind of stuff that customers have always seen in the market, not a whole lot on, ooh, I'd like to switch. Can you help me through that? So smaller customers may be sitting back saying, let's wait and see what this market is about. I'd like to know more about the players, maybe more about the services on offer. Or maybe they simply need to know more about how it's going to help them. Maybe as small customers, they're not seeing that, oh, maybe I want to play in this market. I'm not going to get massive price discounts, but maybe there's something else for me. What do we know about the customer experiences to date? We did work with MOSL and Ofwat in August to publish first quarter data. We compared the contact we had in the first quarter with the same quarter last year. We saw more complaints. We weren't terribly surprised by that. We also saw a lot more inquiries. Again, not terribly surprised. Customers had a lot of questions about the market, and that's a good thing. They came to us. We gave them advice. What we're seeing, I think I would describe more as teething problems. We haven't seen anything that's been a showstopper. That's not to say that selling a market on there hasn't been any showstoppers is where we want to get to. It really does need to dazzle customers with service. I think that's where we want to move to. There are some new issues. Obviously, we haven't seen switching before. We haven't seen customers having to go out trying to get information, so there's some more new issues around that. Where can I go get info? How do I find pricing info? I wish this was easier. We've seen some of that. And obviously, we're working with retailers like Water Plus. In fact, they were in our offices only on Friday to chat through some issues, working with all the other retailers and the wholesalers as well to see if we can't make sure that we're tackling these issues, obviously, before they become a service degradation to customers. In terms of looking ahead at market success and monitoring, I think it probably is worth saying that the market won't be judged for customers purely on whether they're switching or not. We'd also like to make sure that customer satisfaction in the market is on the way up. Perception of value for money, which Carmen will know we track regularly. It'd be good to see if that's on the way up now that the market's open. Our customer's going to tell us that this market's worth it. It's obviously been a big change, the biggest change in, I think, almost, 30 years since the market was open. So, is it been worth it? And again, thinking about the RWM community where we are today, are there signs that retailers and wholesalers are looking to deliver the innovation and the efficiency, managing water usage better, looking towards other markets, waste, whatever. So, there are other signs as well that this is a healthy working market. So we're interested in that as well. So just to conclude, yeah, customers are engaged in the market, but proportionally, we expected the bigger guys are more interested. There's no major issues so far, but that's not necessarily the headline we want. We want to say customer service is great. Customers are probably going to take their time, especially smaller ones. And communication is key. We'll keep talking to customers. We'll keep talking to retailers and wholesalers. We hope they'll keep talking to each other to sort out issues. And especially thinking about the kind of customers that we want to help, SMEs primarily. If massive price discounts aren't coming their way, is there going to be this customer service offering that's really going to dazzle them? And we'd like to see more of that. So thanks, Carmen. Sorry I went a bit longer than everybody else, but my cue card said I had to get these things out, so thank you. All right.
Yeah, thanks, Carmen. So I'm Mike Robertson from MOSL. As Carmen said, MOSL is the market operator for the non-household market. So we started in August 2015. We're a private company that's funded by the water and the sewage companies. Our key focus is really operating and maintaining the central systems that enable the execution of registration and switching, but also financial settlement between retailers and wholesalers. We're also the custodian of the market data set, so the data owners are the companies themselves, but we hold all of that in a secure location. And we administer some of the key processes in the market, such as market entry, market exit, and any disputes. So our role has changed over the course since we've started in August 15, very much in the run-up to market opening. It was all about supporting the readiness of the companies and building the central system. Now it's very much about market operation. So in terms of my key focus, it's around market performance and how that's operating. We're seeing, so as part of that, there's a health check, kind of market health check. Is it working okay? Are we seeing activity? And also looking further into kind of actually taking the quantitative analysis we can do on the central market data set, combining that with some of the qualitative insight from companies to provide some actionable information to the market. So I think, as Evan said, we have seen quite a lot of activity to start with in the first few months of the market. I was thinking about how to summarize those into themes, and I think there's probably 4 key areas. So we've got switching, settlement, entry, and change. And so in terms of switching, and switching's quite often the key focus for most people, and the number of switches have taken place. So we've now seen over 50,000 switches of supply points. And I'm constantly asked, is that a good number? And I think the answer is actually, it's just part of the equation, which is we know that a lot of customers are renegotiating their contracts with their current providers. And whilst that's something that MOSL itself doesn't have a huge amount of information on, that's something that the retailers can provide some insight to. I think what we can see in terms of the 50,000 is that we've seen switching in all areas of the country, and we've seen switching across all different sizes of consumers. We've seen that there's clearly a preference to having one retailer for both services, the water and the sewerage. And I think it's only about 2% of switching has resulted in the services staying with separate retailers. In terms of settlement, so settlement's obviously a key focus for the companies. Around 210 million a month is settled between the retailers and the wholesalers. What that has shown is there's some challenges with some of the data in terms of the completeness and the accuracy, but we've seen huge efforts by the market in terms of improving that data, and the number of exceptions to settlement where some data is stopping it from calculating correctly has reduced by over 50% so far in the market. In terms of entry, I think entry is obviously another key indicator of how the market's performing. We've seen 11 new entrants to date with a range of different models. We've seen our first self-supply retailer come in, and we've seen the second self-supply retailer come in. And we're seeing a lot of activity in terms of mergers, acquisitions, joint ventures, which really boils down to two things, I think. One is that it's a different market landscape now to it was in March, before the market opened. And the other is there's more choice for customers. I think when looking at how many retailers are actively operating in each wholesaler area, the minimum at the moment is 13 retailers in a wholesale area. So we're seeing there is choice there, and that can only be good for the market. I think then the final area where we've seen a huge amount of our activity from maybe a more central market perspective is actually change proposals to the market arrangements themselves, the market codes. So I think there's been a huge amount of activity since 2012 on developing the codes across the industry, but there's always opportunity to improve that. And it's positive that we're seeing that the parties are engaging in how to make the processes and make ultimately the rules of the market more efficient and more beneficial for customers. So I think in terms of the focus moving forward, and I'm probably, like Evan, overrunning the slot a little bit, but in terms of focus moving forward, I think we'll continue to see quite a heavy focus on the market codes themselves. There's currently an independent market audit underway, which is going to highlight some opportunities for improvement for all parties. And in terms of MOSL's activity itself, then I think there's key questions about actually how do we measure performance in the market, what constitutes good performance. We've got the Market Performance Committee, subcommittee panel. It's currently reviewing those standards, and there's a potential for financial incentives to come in the next financial year on that. So we're likely to see a huge move to that. I think one of the key areas for all parties is going to be how we can effectively continue to collaborate, how we can engage with each other, how we can make the most of digital tools, and ultimately how we can make sure that the market continues to deliver good outcomes and better competition.
Okay. Thank you very much. Great opening comments from everybody. Let's just get the ball rolling by picking up on a couple of themes then that came out from those opening comments. And let's begin with customer awareness. Evan's told us it's now 4 in 10 customers that are aware, which is obviously a massive improvement, as you pointed out, but that still means that 6 in 10 are not aware. So it'd be really useful to have some thoughts on how you think that awareness should be spread. Is it now down to the efforts of individual retailers? Obviously, Water Plus, you're here in force today, doing your bit, but should it be down to individual retailers? Should it be down to a more central, coordinated campaign? Let's have some thoughts on that. Brian?
If I kick off. So in terms of awareness, I look after marketing as part of my duties for Water Plus, and we do a lot of digital marketing. And so we keep track on all the Google stats, which are fascinating. The volumes through Google are mind-boggling. One of the things we look at is how many people are searching for different terms. And some of the terms are switch business water, business retail water choice, get business water price, and we keep an eye on each of these terms and what their activity is. And what we've seen is that we started this quite early. We started this about June 2016, so about 9 months before the market opened, and it was very, very low levels. What we've seen, if you were to graph it, would be a nice steady increase, nearly exponential, on the amount of people who are actively searching for these things. So it certainly backs up the research that's been done by Evan, CCW and others, which engagement is growing. It's not that we peaked in April and it's flat. It's still on its upward trajectory, especially with the smaller customers. And I think, to your point, Karma, of what's going to drive that to increase further, we certainly feel proud that we've done our bit to promote switching within our customer bases, both United Utilities and Severn Trent. But I think there's going to be a certain word of mouth element. We need customers to experience a better service. So when we're switching customers out of area or in area onto better contracts, onto better propositions, we need that word of mouth to spread down the pub, in the business parks, in their business groups, for more people and more people to feel like it's something worthwhile doing. And again, as Evan said, it's not the price. This market is very low margin. I think it's the thing that's made a lot of. The margin isn't particularly big. People shouldn't be switching for the margin. That's not the main benefit. It's the propositions, it's the service, it's the difference in partnership that you get rather than the difference in the absolute cost. And I think that's what will spread word of mouth and drive engagement. I think as energy, energy's been going 15 years as an open market, and their switching is about 16% per year now, which is pretty good. We should be aspiring to get to those levels. There's no reason why we shouldn't get there in 3, 4, 5 years.
Okay. Anything to add to that, Kim, or has that covered your position?
I think the only other thing that I would add is certainly at Water Plus we see ourselves as educators for our customers as well. And I think certainly from the conversations that I've seen that our people are having with our customers is very much about educating them about the fact that they do have choice. Especially actually with the pieces that we have a lot of liaison with Evan's team around complaint management and that side of things. We are trying to educate our customers to say there are a number of choices out there for you now. This is what we can offer for you, and you should be more demanding of your provider now around what your expectations are, making sure that what your values are align with the retailer that you're actually with as well. So we definitely educate our customers on a day-to-day basis as well as all the marketing activity that Brian was talking about. So,
okay, and Evan, I know CC Water's done its bit as well, hasn't it? It's been quite active in promoting the market.
We knew, we went to Scotland before the market opened, and we knew that even almost 10 years on, they were still saying, we didn't know about this. We had no idea. So despite our relatively small size, we did actively contact a lot of business customer groups. Obviously worked with Carl through MEUC, a lot of venues, and did try to get that word out there. It's the question about what the best way. I don't think there's any single best way. We saw awareness increase. We like to think that direct engagement helped, but so too did some of the events that Ofwat had organized and open water around different venues around the country. There was a national media campaign that Ofwat spearheaded as well. But also, yes, retailers do have a role. They, in the end of the day, have those customers on tap. There's an opportunity at regular touch points to remind them there's an open market. Any retailer that's worth their salt will say, look, you don't like what we're doing for you, you can go out there and find somebody else, but we do hope that you like X, Y, and Z, which we can offer you. So there is a lot more to do. It's worth remembering that, yes, awareness is increasing, but it's also still a lot higher for large businesses than it is for small businesses. The proportionate switching rate for large businesses is magnitude higher than it is for smaller businesses. Yeah. So there's work to do there. I would agree with Brian that one of the things that will sell it is this service proposition, and yes, it will be the target business group to say, you know what, I switched to X and they can do this for me, and that's, the water company can never do that for me. And I think at the minute we're not there yet. We're trying so far to make sure we keep a status quo customer service, which is good, and there are other markets that have opened and seen things tank, and we haven't seen that, and that's good. But that's not enough. We have to say, the market's open, and you know what, retailer X can do this for me. Yeah. And that is going to sell the awareness and the interest going forward. So.
Okay. Anything to add, or is that covered at all?
I think just from kind of a MOSL perspective is actually that, so we don't really have a lot of information on the piece of the market between the retailer and the end customer. But I think there is a role that we all have in terms of making sure that the market is transparent and accessible to all. So MOSL is publishing information publicly so that people can get an understanding of the market, but I think it really is for the retailers and the consumer groups and other public bodies to really be driving that message with customers.
Okay, so just before we turn to the audience, I'll ask one more question about the market performance to date. Obviously, you've said there's been about 50,000 SPID switches, which I think is just shy of about 2% of customers in the market. And obviously, partly that figure might be tied up with the awareness that we've already covered. But from a retailer perspective, and perhaps from CC Water as well, are you finding that most people who engage with the market do follow through with either a switch or a renegotiation, or are there some people that are looking at it and actually walking away without acting? Can you give us a sense?
Yeah, so I think, as with every good answer, it depends. So it depends on the customer group. So if I talk for a second about the larger end of the customer groups. So customers who are spending a lot of money on water potentially have a dedicated water or facilities management team, or certainly person. They will likely be very aware, they'll be very active, they'll be very engaged. And the thing for those larger organizations are they usually have sites and locations in more than one wholesale region. So historically, they've got 2 bills, 2 different formats, 2 different account managers. Potentially, if they're a national, they've had 21 different bills, 21 different account managers, 21 different ways of putting a query in, getting a query back. And so the attraction with the very large national groups is not always, as I said, about price. It's the ability for a single supplier to stitch all that together into one place, one bill, one platform, one account manager, and provide it to them once rather than 21 times. And I think that's very attractive to people who have been needing to keep 21 phone numbers, 21 addresses, 21 bill formats. So I think there's a big pull from the large to say, look, just make this easy for us. And that's what we're trying to do, as I think most retailers, and especially as Water Plus, we're trying to make it easy. And I think for the large ones, that's one of the key drivers. And we have seen a lot of the switching so far, as Michael indicated, has been at the larger end. So it's been at the larger end who can see those stitched together as a very kind of attractive benefit of the switch alongside the proposition and the service. I think for the smaller end, there's some dipping of toes going on. So there's some inquiries of what kind of price can I get, what kind of service can I get, and what's the difference of if I take a contract versus not. So competition into a market, as a lot of you may know, tends to do a few things. It tends to get cost efficiencies, as people need to be cost efficient, otherwise we lose out on customers. Our customers now have a choice, and if they don't like us, they'll vote with their feet. It tends to raise the service bar. Again, from a purely, if I put my just selfish hat on, if we don't deliver a good service, our customers will walk. And that's not what we need, that's not what we want. And so service gets lifted for everybody. So it's the tide that lifts all boats in terms of competition raising. Whether you've got a contract or not, the competitive market will raise service. And thirdly, it's choice. So 1, you have a choice, and 2, competition should create different models. And we're seeing that in the market, which is pretty exciting at the moment. So Water Plus is a joint venture between 2 of the existing incumbents. You're seeing new entrants working on a very different cost base. You're seeing some people coming in using cross-sell from other industries. There's a choice of supplier architecture, supplier makeup, the background of each supplier. There's a choice in service and propositions, and there's a choice on price. And so I think a lot of people are dipping their toes, seeing what it is, seeing what they're going to do. In terms of your question, are they all jumping or are they waiting to see what happens? I think it's a mix. I think at the high end, we're seeing a lot of people make the jump. They're convinced of the benefits, they're confident of the process, and they're making the change. And I think they're leading the way. So the early adopters are leading the way. I think as you go down in terms of revenue in the market, people are waiting to see what happens. So we're doing an awful lot of quotes, and the quotes are being held open for a long time as people look how others are reacting, how the market's reacting. As Evan said, I think switching has gone pretty smoothly, incredibly smoothly from our point of view. I think we're on top of the process. It was new.
Yeah.
There's a lot of data flying around that we haven't seen before, and a lot of people are putting a lot of effort, including us, to make sure it comes across clean and builds first time. There is lots of nuances in the data to iron out, and that's all happening with these first switches. So I think the early adopters are doing it, they're seeing the benefits, they'll start to shout. We've got Sainsbury's who are here today, who'll be talking on a different platform about their experience with us. I think that will drive the market down in terms of switching, and I think SMEs, the smaller end of the market, in energy as well, it tends to be a sliding scale between engagement at the high end going down to engagement in SME. I think they will get engaged, but it'll just take a bit more time. It'll take a bit of time for it to bleed down the market. So I think high end, yes. Middle end, yes or very soon. Bottom end, they're waking up, they're warming up, and I think they'll join in the next few years.
And I guess that's the kind of pattern you might expect in a new market, particularly one where the margins are not great, and for small businesses it may not be an obvious choice where it actually is for lots of multi-sites.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's down to us to provide attraction. So not everything is not everything is margin, and so we need to figure out different ways to attract customers. And I know Kim and team are working on various propositions that are over and above margin to make it attractive.
Evan, do you want to comment on that from a CC Water perspective?
Sure, Karma. One of the things I think worth clarifying is we don't know whether switching is smooth yet. We know we haven't had a load of complaints about it, but you'll know that could just simply be the volumes of customers and the kind of clientele that would come our way. Certainly when we went up to Scotland New Research, they said the apprehension of switching was a lot worse than the experience. Most customers who switched said it's probably all right. So we haven't had a whole lot of contact to be able to say customers are going and kind of exploring and then maybe pulling back. But we will do some research later in the year and ask customers what their experiences have been of the market. We will see who's aware, who's engaged, who's put their foot in, who's pulled their foot out. Certainly the bit of research we just did, although it was a smaller sample size and it's meant more to track, we did ask the question, are you interested in the market? 50% said, yeah, next 6 months. Would you like to negotiate the next 6 months? 40%, and then switching was 30%. So you kind of see this,
sort of natural
the
caution.
more action you have to take, the more apprehensive customers kind of become. So there's certainly an indication that now they're not diving in, they're going to wait, they want to see what's happening. So.
Okay, well let me turn to you then. Any questions or comments? Yes? Right. There's only one hand held, I'm afraid, so I'm going to have to come out to you. If you can just say who you are and where you're from as well, please.
Chris Barrett, Auditels, a third-party intermediary. Off what I've observed that price or offer comparison is not easy, as we all have.
Yep.
So my question is, why can't the water industry simply present prices as prices, i.e. standing charge in a unit rate, like everyone else does?
Shall I go first? Firstly, I think you're right. I don't think price comparison for third parties is easy right now. One of the reasons, so CMOS, which is the market system operated by MOSL, has got an awful lot of data in it. It's got, for 1 meter, it's got the meter size, what they use on the various services, so waste, water. It's also got the estimated consumption, and that's what we as a retailer can see, and that's what we as a retailer price off of. At the moment, that information is not accessible to third parties, accessible only to retailers. Now, what we're finding is that when we are providing quotes for customers and for third parties on behalf of customers, is that people are using different background information to build the quote. So they're using different consumption levels, sometimes a different number of sites in a tender, sometimes different services. They do the waste, the water, and they forget the highways drainage. And so it's a bugbear that I have too. We want to be compared toe-to-toe to every other retailer on a like-for-like fair basis. And we're trying to figure out the way in which we can do that to make sure that our prices are like-for-like. One of the ways we can do it is uplift on wholesale. So with the larger customers, as some of you may know, we can price as an uplift against the wholesale charge. The wholesale charges are publicly known for every site in the country. So they are public domain information. You can calculate them if you so wish. A lot of you may not choose to, but it is there if you need to. And we can offer a wholesale on top of, an uplift, on top of the wholesale. Doing that takes out the ambiguity with how the various retailers have calculated the wholesale charge and does allow you a like-for-like comparison. My wish, I don't know if we'll get it, is in time, a bit like happened with energy, I spent a decade in energy B2B, is that the information in MOSL's central database, CMOS, is available to third parties on a licensed kind of I will use this in a responsible way manner, and they themselves can make sure that quotes are being provided on a like-for-like basis. If I provide a unit rate at the moment, as you're talking about in your question, I've got no confidence that that unit rate will be on a like-for-like basis with retailer B, C, or D, and therefore I prefer to compare it as a wholesale uplift because I know that that is a comparable basis. So I agree it's a problem. I think we've got a way to go in the market to get to a more mature stance, and I'd love to hear if there's a different way to approach it, because that's the one I can think of at this point.
I don't get the point that you can't compare a unit rate with a unit rate, because you plug in a consumption, which could be your consumption or whatever you get from MOSL.
Yeah.
But it's just a straightforward mathematical calculation. So it is directly comparable with anybody else. That's how it happens in energy. So I don't see why there's such a problem just saying it's X pound a day and X pound per metre cube plus what are the other bits and pieces. And then the next one comes along and he does the same thing. It's just absolutely linear. But
so,
obviously not.
At the moment, what we're finding is that we present the quotes in that manner, and we've got the count. We're being told by other third parties that people are using different consumptions and different service sets, and therefore that's not a like-for-like comparison. So you may be more advanced in terms of being able to analyse, but for the ones that we've dealt with and I've seen, they haven't been on a like-for-like, and therefore we've lost out through comparison rather than through true quality.
You're right, they're not like-for-like, and they are very difficult to compare. Plus, my observation being that if you just said, if off what said, give them a price, not a discount, not a pound's discount or a percentage discount or an uplift or a pound, that's where it gets complicated. Just a couple of other observations, really. In energy, we've tried to encourage business customers to be efficient for years and years and years. And it's still a real struggle because there's a difference between taking a cheaper price and having to do something. So I would challenge whether the efficiency model as a way forward to differentiation is going to be as easy as you might think. And the same with customer services. We see it all the time. There are some bad suppliers out there. Everyone knows that they're terrible. Customers can be told till you're blue in your face, but they'll still go because they're cheaper. So it's a challenge you've got on your hands, I think.
Just to come back on that last point, so we've talked about margins. Margins are fairly slim. So if you compare 4 retailers, my guess is their price will be within 1% of each other. So I think the total spread will be 1% on revenue, which obviously to a procurement manager is in the noise. If you can think about saving 5%, 10% through a partnership, and it's not hard to save 5 or 10% on water. Water is not something that's been actively managed. A few stickers in the bathrooms usually saves 5%. These are low-hanging fruit if you get the right partner. And I'm with you. I think we're all on the same side. We want a better deal for customers. The savings are in consumption reduction much more than they are in the actual margin, and you get the consumption reduction through the right partner. So, the cheapest price doesn't always end up with the cheapest bill.
I also think, actually, just to add on to that, I completely agree with the point around the energy market. I think it's putting energy saving and water saving into a format that's either interesting for the client and the customer, or is undoubtable in respect of its performance. And certainly my last role was creating Hive active heating, and the biggest reason that we sold so many of those with British Gas was because of the fact that it will absolutely categorically save people money. And the reason for that is heightened awareness and making sure that people are more aware of when they're consuming energy and when they're and if we can do similar things for the water market, where we can make it appealing and interesting for customers to save and learn about consumption, I think we can do it. I think it's just a case of getting ourselves into a position where we can find something that is appealing and interesting for people that also helps them to save money.
Okay, just before we move on, let's just ask Mike for a comment, because some of the issues that came up there concerned the quality of the data in CMOS and whether everyone can take the same thing from it. And secondly, whether there should be third-party access to that database. And at the moment, it's only wholesalers and retailers that can access it. But I know from some work I do with major energy users that there is an appetite from some of the largest companies to be able to interrogate that data, and obviously from some third-party intermediaries as well. So perhaps if you can just respond on those 2 points.
Yeah, so I think in terms of, it's true, we do hold a huge amount of data in the central data set. I think looking back at kind of why we're in the place, and quite often I hear from both wholesalers and retailers about the various sides of wanting to get a single price versus actually having the complexity of tariff to differentiate. And I think since privatization in '89, we have seen 25 regional wholesale areas developing their own tariffs on their own approaches, and that means that whilst we hold a huge amount of data, it's inherently complex by the way it's pulled together. I think in terms of the access to CMOS and to the information in there and the ability to compare price on that, I think that's probably a longer conversation that needs to be happening between both retailers and wholesalers. Ultimately, our responsibility as MOSL is securely holding the data, but the owners of the data itself are the retailers and the wholesalers. So we'll be heavily driven by actually those in the market and what the benefits that they're paying and how that feeds in with the regulator as well.
Okay, so any other questions and comments? Thanks.
Hi, Danny Clark from JLL. I'm just wondering, it's titled Deregulation, but in 5 years, what's the role of the regulator? Is anyone willing to take a view?
Ooh. I'll start on that. As everyone takes a deep breath in, I think. So I think one of the key drivers for, and we work very closely with Ofwat, the economic regulator, is one of the key drivers for everyone in the market is to ensure that the market can, to the extent possible, regulate itself. That actually the information is there, that the market can respond and drive out what might be negative behaviours. I think when we then start considering actually the regulatory tools in place, is actually they can be slower. In terms of their ability to respond, they are usually slower. They might take months rather than what could be quicker bilateral resolution. So I think, and the CMA has recently done a review where it says in essence that the threat of a regulator is important for markets as much as the actions of a regulator are. So I think we'll always see the economic regulation of the market. Hopefully we'll see quicker responses in the market and a bit more of a self-policing role, with then the regulator being able to take more targeted interventions rather than broad brush casework.
I think from my perspective, it's one of my favourite subjects, so you might have to shut me up in a minute. I think any market can work in any regulated condition as long as it's stable. And so one of my preferences would be that we don't look to correct before the market's had a chance to correct itself. So I think there's been a great amount of work in learning from a lot of different markets around the world, a lot of different industries, to build a really good code base for this market. And we're now really using it in anger for the first time. And there are things that are working, and there are things that you think, maybe that could be different. I think what we need to make sure we do is just stick with it for a little bit of time and let the market self-correct. If we are going to make change, it should be considered, measured, and it should be flagged a long way in advance. Changes are expensive, and any expense to us is unfortunately expense to the customer. And therefore, the less changes that the market can make, as from the regulated point of view, I would support, and I would also support the retailers doing things to improve the market on their own backs. So there is an awful lot of opportunity out there which retailers can take their own directions, their own models to go out and get, and we've got a really good regulatory set. And I'd say, look, let's use it, let's see how it goes. I don't think there are any big issues. We haven't spotted any, as Evan and Michael have said, and I would look to a consistent and measured regulatory change agenda going forwards, and I would hope that the market would correct itself more than a regulator needing to come through. I think a regulator is healthy for the market, but also it needs to be left to develop in its own ways.
Evan, do you want to comment on that?
I think so far what we've seen is probably what Brian's saying is a market that is developing. Again, no showstoppers. Ofwat is involved. They are party to conversations. They haven't appeared to have done a whole lot of meddling, but it's been a productive. Obviously, I wasn't there when other markets opened, but this one feels like MOSL's talking to us, talking to Ofwat, talking to retailers. So my impression is that they will be interested in seeing how it goes. We know they've got a big interest in monitoring the market. Obviously, we've got a role there in looking at complaints, but they're very interested in that. I think how the next price review is going to be probably a lot different now that the market's open. Retailers are probably going, what about this, what about this? And wholesalers are going, whoa, maybe not. And so Ofwat will have a role there, but I tend to agree with Brian. I think they're going to be watching, looking, probably not making too many big, messing too much with it from what I can see so far. But they are very interested, I know that much.
Did you have a view?
Interestingly, a regulator I spoke to a few years ago in the Ofgem was of the view that without gaming, that it's not a competitive market, and it was a very fine line, regulation in what you do. And so I'm hoping to see less of the regulator.
Okay. I come to John. He always has a tricky question.
That's too much pressure. It's not tricky. A few of the panel have experience of... Sorry, John Benson, I'm an independent consultant now. A few of the panel have experience of being in the energy market, and you talk about SMEs, and I think it's quite interesting because the conversation at the beginning was there was good engagement amongst SMEs, it improved, etc. But I then think, as we went on in the conversation, Brian hit the nail on the head there, that actually probably the SMEs is how the water industry looks at it now, differently to how they did before. Before, water industry managed on large users, and they were considered biggest, and the SMEs were small. Now, the SMEs which are switching, I suspect, probably are, and as I think Brian said this, are more multi-site ones. So my question really is do you have any concerns or worries that we might follow the energy market in terms of, in 5 years' time, you've still got 40% of your customer base, which is what I'd class as true SMEs, i.e. they're small single sites, unable to switch or because they don't see any value in it, and effectively become the small people who are cross-subsidising the other deals you do for the blue chip companies. So how do we avoid the energy route?
That was a difficult question.
Kim, do you want to start? Because you've got energy experience, recent energy experience.
I don't know where to start, actually. I think Brian's probably better starting that one.
So,
That's okay.
I was in the SME world in energy, and there, I'll do a potted history of energy. So, the market opened in energy, and the big users switched, and the little ones didn't. Other things that happened, so a lot of the energy companies were one fuel or other fuel, and they very quickly, within about 5 years, the gas companies got electricity functionality, and the electric companies got gas functionality. And so propositions developed that were over and above margin, over and above service, which is interesting. Brokers came into the market, really it wasn't a feature, and brokers came in really because I think the energy market was complex. It was seen as complex, it was perceived as complex. Whether it was or wasn't, it was perceived as such, and therefore there was a need for education which the retailers didn't sufficiently fill. Step on a little bit, and the models that people switched onto became different. So in energy, there were discounts on introduction, there were 5-year deals, 3-year deals. There's been some innovation in the types of offerings, as well as some kit. So in energy, you can get a smart meter, which gives you access to different things. You can get the little owl meters that you can stick on your walls. And via Kim, you can get active heating management. And so there's this kit that's come along with it to make the propositions more attractive. I think history repeats itself. So I see that SMEs will engage through, not, as I said, not through price, but through all the things we can get additionally. Kit, education, different things being bundled together, different attractive propositions being pieced together that we might not have already. I think there will be some that never switch, as with energy. When I left energy a couple of years ago, I think it was estimated that 15% of SMEs had never ever switched. And bearing in mind that's probably, 15, 20 years, I think those customers are hard to get to. I think they deem it economically rational not to bother. And I think that's a good decision. For them, that's a good decision. Others want the kit, they want the tech, they want the switch, they want the money. Some want £1,000 when it's unrealistic, and some are happy with the 50. And so I think you will get this whole spread of emotions and propositions which will engage the SME base. It will take a bit of time to get it right. We're trying to figure out what they want. We're trying to promote it. We're very happy with our internal switching rate, the stuff that you can't see through MOSL. So our own customers switching on to better things, onto new services. And we want word of mouth to get out on that. I think we can offer discounts. We can offer attractive propositions. We can offer nice tech, nice bundles. None of that is limited. The regulator is not limiting that in 1 ounce. We just need to figure out what it is.
I do also think, actually, that we, as an industry, we will have learned a lot with hindsight from the energy market. And brokers and introducers will form a much quicker support for that than we did in the energy side because we know that comparison sites are huge introducers for our energy contracts nowadays. That took a very long time for us to be able to build in the market, whereas we won't have that challenge with water. They are already up and running. We've already got lots of brokers in the market who are looking at how we can better service customers, and I think that will really help us to not have that same kind of time lag and to be able to get us into that position as well.
Evan, do you want to add anything?
I do have that worry. I do worry there will be some customers that don't access the market. I think it's worth repeating what Brian said. There'll be some who won't switch, but I think the challenge is to make sure that the market's done everything they can to get that information out there. Pricing information, is it available? Are service propositions clear to those customers? Are retailers being held to account if they're not being transparent? This is an open market. Hey, you haven't switched in 5 years, maybe you might be interested. We're there giving customers advice if they're a bit trepidatious about it. So I think if we create an environment where they have the opportunity, I think that is another measure of success. We'd like to get them all interested, but we know some of them won't be. But still a lot more we can do to generate that environment of interest and especially amongst SMEs.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes before the session ends. Is there any further questions? One last question, maybe? No? Okay. I'll just ask a quick one then. We've only got a couple of minutes, so just be brief in your answer. I was at a discussion last week, and the subject of third-party intermediary regulation came up. I know it's early days, but obviously you would have had a lot of interaction as a retailer, presumably, with all the brokers and things that are active in the market, and maybe some information from customers coming back to you as well at CC Water. So perhaps briefly a thought on how that relationship is working so far with yourselves and the third-party intermediaries, and whether you think regulation would be a good thing.
Shall I start?
Yeah.
I think good brokers are good for the market, is my stance and Water Plus's stance. So a good broker who provides additional services to customers, who helps educate where retailers have not been able to, who gives a customer confidence in whatever they need to have confidence in, I think that's great for the market. I think as with any sector, any industry, any group of businesses, there are good and bad, and we work to make sure that the third parties that we partner with sign up to our internal values and agreements and work on behalf of customers in a positive way. And I think regulation needs to be careful. For those who know the regulatory market, so Ofwat don't have the powers to directly regulate third parties. They can try and regulate through the retailer, but they can't directly regulate third parties. As with Ofgem, can't do either, but they can do things to make retailers ensure that third parties are working in certain ways. So that's how they might regulate at arm's length, if you like. I think one of the challenges is the third parties are dealing with lots of industries. They're dealing with energy, water, telecoms, insurance, they all have a different portfolio, but usually they're across different regulators. So there are 3, 4, 5, 6 regulators in the party there. And it's how you get consistency of regulation if you're going to look at the third-party market. And I think that's where regulators have to come together and agree what good looks like from third party. What conditions should third parties hold themselves up to and be proud of versus what ones could potentially look to be regulated. I think it's a tough puzzle. I'd personally think that the water market has gone further through Ofwat and through MOSL than the energy market in terms of regulations through retailers onto third parties. We're waiting to see how that plays out. One thing to make sure of is that the regulations that are set down are consistent for all parties. And that's an incredibly important point, that if you are going to put a regulatory framework in place, everybody has to play to those rules. Otherwise, people are getting an unfair advantage or an unfair disadvantage. And so I think it's an interesting area. Consistency is key. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I would welcome it if it promoted good brokers.
I'm not sure anyone knows what the answer is. Any other comments on that before we wrap up?
We've had a few contacts, mostly from third parties, who say we'd like access to pricing information. So a few contacts from customers, not many, because we haven't had a lot of switches. We haven't had a whole lot of comments about TPIs. Haven't seen that yet. But I would say if we do want them to be part of the solution to getting smaller businesses to switch, I would like to see them invited around a table. Ofwat has put out some information about how TPI should behave. I think we need to make it easy for them to sit around a table and talk on a regular basis, going, what are you seeing? So that, if they do want access to CMOS at some point, and Ofwat says, well, you got to sign up to X, maybe they go, okay, yeah, that sounds reasonable. So I just think we need to have them around a table rather than maybe what's happened in other sectors where things go wrong and it's like, well, tar them with a brush. I think we're in a position, they are a bit more of a mature market. We can talk to them, they'll talk back to us, and we can learn from each other. So.
Okay.